Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining this Microsoft Reactor live stream event. Today, Sidney Andrews, an Azure MVP, will be presenting on authentication for your apps. If this is your first time joining us, please be aware that we will be recording this session and then at the conclusion, posting it to our YouTube channel, which usually takes a few days to go live. I will share the link to our channel in the chat box, so just check that out. If you're not able to stay for the entirety of the event, you can always tune in and watch it at a later date. Or if you want to circle back, if you have anything that you've missed and you want to check in, that's another opportunity to do so. We're always striving for new and engaging content, so please, at the end of this event, we will be sharing a survey link, and just feel free to follow through and send us your feedback. At this time, I will share the floor and let Sidney come on and begin his presentation. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. Hey, everyone, really excited to talk to you today in this really quick talk where we're gonna talk about the Microsoft Identity Platform and the Microsoft Authentication Library. Very minimal slides, a lot of demos, so I got a lot I'm going to try and get into today. So just a really quick, brief intro. I'm Sidney Andrews. I'm an Azure MVP and a Microsoft Certified Trainer. My Twitter handle at Sidney_Andrews is right there. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's where I'm both the weirdest and the most technical. So lots of good content there. I share out a lot of stuff. That's really the whole intro. I really want to get into this because I have a lot I want to show you today in a concise amount of time. So before we do any demos or anything technical, I want to talk a bit about the Microsoft Identity Platform and what it is. So we have three types of accounts that we've seen. And these accounts, we see them when we work with Azure Active Directory or when we build custom applications, or we even work with other applications. And they're your organizational accounts. We sometimes refer to them as your work or school accounts. Those are the ones that we think of when we think of Azure Active Directory. We have our personal accounts. Those are your like Microsoft accounts. So think about the account you use on Xbox, you use on Outlook.com. And then we have our social or third-party accounts. So that's stuff like, Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn. Typically, when we use those, we think of services such as like Azure Active Directory B2C. Now, developing against that has been traditionally difficult. We've had the Azure Active Directory endpoint, which retroactively is referred to as V1.0. And it has the Azure Active Directory Authentication Library, or ADAL. You probably heard of people talking about ADAL, the .NET version, ADAL.js. You've probably seen some of the code demos. And if you're anything like me, I saw some of these horrifying code demos. And not horrifying as in it's bad code, but horrifying as in many of the samples took 50 to 100 lines of code to do something as simple as log a user in. So when the sample is that complex, it's hard to really dig in and get excited about it. But one of the cool things about Azure Active Directory is that Azure Active Directory is really an identity service. It's not Active Directory in the cloud. And I say that because as an identity service, it implements many of the popular specifications. So if you already are familiar with using services like Auth0 and the OAuth 2 protocol, then you can use that with Azure Active Directory. And so this whole idea of moving towards like open protocols, open flows, making the developer experience easier than ever led to the Microsoft Identity Platform, or the version 2.0 endpoint. Now, the Microsoft Identity Platform is really this whole idea of let's make a REST endpoint, still RESTful, but this time include the entire party. Yeah, you can use it to authenticate to Azure AD accounts, but you can also use it to authenticate to Microsoft accounts. You can use it to authenticate to social accounts using, Azure AD B2C. Along with this endpoint came the Microsoft Authentication Library, a slimmed down, simplified library, not reduced in functionality, but just made much easier to onboard to. It shouldn't take you 100 lines of code to get where you want to go. If we can authenticate in 5 or 6 lines of code and the method names are simple to read and it's really easy to parse the code and figure out what's going on, then that's a victory. And then all sorts of services, whether you're using the Azure portal, whether you're using an Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, they're using this Microsoft Authentication Library underneath the hood. So this whole idea that's already being adopted by Microsoft, it'd be simple for you to adopt. Now, ADAL, Azure AD endpoint, all of that's still around. It's just retroactively called 1.0 in the sense of, hey, if you've already built stuff using that, that's fine. You can keep going. But moving forward, you should definitely check out the Microsoft Identity Platform. Now, I promise not a lot of slides today. That was it. That's my slides for today. What I like to do is really 3 things. The first thing I'm going to do is show you how you can manually authenticate to that Microsoft Identity Platform endpoint using just a browser and Postman. After I do that, I'm going to show you how to use the MSAL library to do the same thing, but in a much simpler way with only a couple of lines of code. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to use this Microsoft Authentication Library and the Microsoft Identity Platform, not just to log people in, but to get tokens that you can use to access services. We'll do a simple demo with the Microsoft Graph where I just go grab my profile information. And then I'm looking at the time. If we have enough time, I'm going to also show you how to get to a service such as Azure SQL Database. So let's dig in. So this is my real identity, Sidney at C#run.net. I'm logged in to my directory. And what I'm going to do here from the Azure portal is I'm just going to go to all services and go to Azure Active Directory. Now within Azure Active Directory, we have all the stuff we need. We have our users, our groups, configurations such as like branding, governance, our custom domain names. But the thing I'm interested in today is app registrations. Now, with app registrations, essentially, I can go in and create a new registration so that I can use Azure Active Directory. So we'll call this Reactor, the name of our registration. Now, what type of accounts do I want to give access? Do I want to make it just my organization only, so scope to my tenant? Do I want to make it any organization, so any work or school account, multi-tenant across all of Azure AD? Do I want to make it even further? Do I want to make it all Azure AD tenants plus Microsoft accounts, or do I just want to allow personal Microsoft accounts? Today, we'll keep things simple. We'll say, you know what, as long as it's the Azure AD account, they can log in. Now down here, I have my redirect URI. This is optional here, but for this demo, we're going to do it. Basically, when you're using login, like if you're in a browser and you're logging in, you would go to the login website and it'll redirect you back to your website. So this is where you will put that in. Many of the desktop clients require you to specify redirect URI. So I would do that. I'm going to just do something really simple. I'm going to create a public client native application. So that's like a mobile or desktop application. So think like a WPF application, a mobile app, a console application. I'll create that type. And I'm going to say, you know what? Whenever I log in, redirect me to localhost. And then I'm going to click register. Once I click register, I have an application registration, and I'm going to be able to use it in these demos. The most important thing I want to grab from this application registration is my client ID. So I'll go ahead and grab that. Now that I have my client ID, we can start having some fun. So I have a tool open called Postman. The reason I like using Postman is because Postman allowed me to send requests. It also allows me to build out really long and complex URLs. So if I want to log in to Azure Active Directory, I'm going to need to go to the login URL. So HTTPS, and you might have seen this before if you've ever logged into anything Microsoft, login.microsoftonline.com. That's the magic URL. Now, once I have login.microsoftonline.com, I need to tell it what tenant I'm going to log into. Now, I can provide the GUID for my tenant, and that'll be fine. I can provide a GUID for somebody else's tenant. That'll be fine. And it'll just scope the login to just that tenant. And that's your Azure Active Directory tenant. Now, if I didn't want to do that, I can specify keywords that allow me to be a little bit more broad. So there's one for organizations, And that allows me to only scope this to work in school accounts. There's one, I believe, consumers. That allows me to scope it to Microsoft accounts or personal accounts, or common. You know what? Any account. So I'm going to do common. And from login MicrosoftOnline.com, we're going to do the OAuth 2 flow. And since we're going to log in using the Microsoft Identity Platform version 2.0 endpoint, we need to put in that relative URL. So I'm going to copy this. I like to post stuff in the Q&A. So just made an announcement in the Q&A. Just copy that URL for anybody who's interested in grabbing that. Now, there's two places we want to go. The first one is we want to authorize. We want to send the user somewhere to authorize and get a code back, proving that they authorized and since we trust Azure Active Directory, once we get that code back, we're going to send that code to a token endpoint to get an OAuth bearer token that we can use to access the service. This is the beautiful thing about everything being HTTP requests. The flows are pretty standard. So the first thing we need to do is send the user somewhere. So I'm going to build a URL to the authorize endpoint, and I need to give it some query string parameters. The first one, I'm going to give it as client ID. I'm going to go grab that from the Azure portal. And just for those who are unsure, the client ID is right here in the Azure portal. Forgive my Madden skills, but that's the client ID I'm grabbing. Now, once I grab that, I'm going to just jump back in, paste that in, and then I need to say where I'm going to redirect you to. So redirect URI. I'm going to go to HTTP localhost. What do I want to scope this permission to? See, when I make a request, I need to tell it what API I want permission to access. Now, if I go into this application registration and go to API permissions, I can see that I already have access to the Microsoft Graph, graph.microsoft.com, and the user.read permission. You know what? That's simple enough. So, and it's not case sensitive, so I can just go HTTPS graph.microsoft.com user.read. Now, two custom ones I want to add in. Response type. What do I want back? Well, I want a code. And in response mode, do I want this responding back as a query, like in the query string? When it goes back to localhost, do I want the code in the query string? Or when it go back to localhost, do I want the code as a form post? Today we're demoing, so I'm just going to do a query string. The last one is optional. You don't need to specify. This is state. If you just want to send a value and make sure that same value comes back, you can do that. So Reactor is awesome, is my state. Now, normally you're like, okay, hit send. But this is the URL I'm going to be sending a user to. So I'm going to just copy that URL, go to my browser, paste it in, and I go to my login page. Now, I was already logged in, so it passed me through. But if I wasn't, this will be the part where I log in. Matter of fact, I think it'll be good to show you that. So I'm going to sign out. And then I'm going to go to login, MicrosoftOnline.com. Oh, I thought I signed up. This is what happens when you don't sign out, right? I'm going to correctly sign out this time. You know what? I just realized I have passwordless auth, and if I signed out, I would have to grab my mobile phone to sign in. I don't have my mobile phone on me, so you're gonna have to forgive me for not showing that part of the demo. Normally, it will actually ask you to sign in, but I'm already signed in. I'm not gonna that technical error. Just blame it on me. All right, so I've asked for permission to read my profile. So it tells me, just like a mobile application, this app has requested permission to do this, and it's not published by Microsoft, it's published by this person. I'm going to accept this, and it's consenting, and then it redirected to localhost and gave me a long query string value. So I'm going to copy this query string value. Again, apologize about that. I should have signed outside the back end, but I just realized I had passwordless off. Here, a couple things. And somebody said browser incognito mode. The problem is I have passwordless off. I don't know where my phone is, and I can't log in because I don't I have no idea what the password is. It's like a 80 character string. It's crazy. All right, so this is what it redirected to, localhost. It gave me my state. Reactor is awesome, so I know that That's good to go. And it gave me a code. Now, using that code, I can actually go request an authorization token. So I need to do a put request, https login.microsoft.online.com, common OAuth 2 v2.0. And this time, instead of going to authorize, we're going to go to token endpoint. Now, since this is a post request, we're going to do a body. You can do it JSON, but actually, I know this is going to sound crazy and people are going to judge me, but I prefer doing form data. So client ID, go grab that since I already have that. That's easy. Redirect URI, going to go HTTP localhost. I know the scope already is HTTPS graph.microsoft.com user.read. Code, I have this code. I'm going to just copy and paste this code. And then finally, grant type. So what do I want for this service? I want an authorization code. This is going to let me use this to access any API as a OAuth bearer token. I hit send, and there we go. I have an OAuth bearer token. This is when it expires, and that's my token. So what do I want to access? Well, I want to use this to access the Microsoft Graph. aka.ms/ge will get you to the Microsoft Graph Explorer, just in case you've never used a graph before. I'm posting that in an announcement. Okay. And then from here, I can go in and test out different queries. Now, I'm going to sign into the Graph Explorer using my account. And I see there's a really easy one, graph.microsoft.com v1.0 me. I run this query, and it gets my information. This seems easy. I want to go to that, right? So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go put in Postman, just open a new one, send a GET request to the me endpoint. Everything should work, right? No, I actually need an access token. But hold on, wait a second. I have an access token. It has permission to read my profile. I'm going to copy that, go to authorization, and this is an OAuth bearer token. You can see I had some in the past. I paste that in, and if I scroll down, there's my profile information. So this is how I would do it manually. Now, I'll show you the hard way for a reason, because using the MSAL library, we can do this all in .NET in almost no code. So I'm going to create a brand new .NET application, .NET new script. And I'm running .NET 5.0, and script is just a top-level program template. So this is my script. It just uses system namespace, console.out.writeLine, hello world. If I run it, it'll print out hello world. Super simple, nothing too crazy here. Now, this is where it gets a lot of fun. I can go in here and bring in .NET add package Microsoft.identity.client. That's the MSAL library. Now from here, I can add a using Microsoft.identity.client. And then I'm going to add a using static to system.console, so I don't have to write console.writeLine every time. All right. I'm going to create a string variable called client ID. That client ID looks very familiar, right? That's because I can go back into the Azure portal, so portal.azure.com. Go back to my app registrations, go back to this Reactor app and grab my client ID. Now, when we use the MSAL library, we have these static classes called application builders. You can create a public client application builder where the user logs in, or a confidential client application builder where you have the credentials stored. Public clients, if you don't want any credentials stored in your application, you want the user to log in. Confidential client is usually like a web service or a background job where you do need to store some type of certificate or credential in the application itself. Since I want the user to log in, I'm going to create a public client application builder, use that static create method, and pass in my client ID. Now, all the methods for MSAL are fluent, so I can configure it. The only thing I want to configure is redirect URI. I'm going to make that HTTP localhost. I don't want to configure any specific tenant or any other settings. I just want to build this public client application. I'm going to store it in a variable called app. That's easy so far. Now, the next thing I need to do is create a string array. I'm going to call this scopes. Now you can have more than one scope. We've been doing one scope so far, so we'll keep doing that. Graph.microsoft.com, user.read. Super simple, right? Now this is where it gets fun. If I go to app, I can call acquire token. Now there's many different ways I can do it. I can do integrated Windows authentication, username, password. I can do it silently if I've acquired it before. I can do it with a device code if we're on like an IoT device and it doesn't have a browser. But today we have a browser, so I'm going to acquire my token interactively. Now it's going to say, what scopes do you want? Well, I have an array of scopes. And then I'm going to call the execute async method. Since this is C#, I'm going to await that asynchronous execution and then store the result of this in a variable called result. Last thing, right line, result.access token. So if I did this correctly, I'll go .NET run. It'll open my browser window. I'll assign it Sidney and C# run.NET. I've already given permission. There's my access token. So all that first steps, those first two requests we did to get the access token, that was it. That was the entire code. And by the way, if you're wondering about the code for the sample, bit.ly reactor-MSAL is a hyperlink I added to the Q&A as an announcement. That way you can go in and excuse me, go in and get this sample code. Now I said if I have time, I'm looking at my time, I'm short on it, but I said if I had time, I'll show you some more stuff. So first I want to show you is how do we get to the Microsoft Graph? Well, there's this really cool package called Flurl. It makes it really easy for you to make HTTP requests. Flurl will send an HTTP request to any string. So I'm going to comment this out. We don't need to print out the access token. I'm going to create a string. Graph.https graph.microsoft.com version 1.0 endpoint me. That's the URL we went to, right? And using Flurl, I can call get. Actually, I need to add a using block. Using Flurl.http, I can call get string async, and it will actually issue a get request to this URL asynchronously and store the value as a string. I'm going to call this string JSON, and I'm going to just write line JSON when I'm done. Now, this will fail if I run it, .NET run. I'm going to auth in and everything, but my actual request doesn't ever send the OAuth bearer token. So 401 unauthorized. That's expected. In order for this to work, I need to add a bearer token. So with OAuth bearer token, result.access token. Save, run the same application again, .NET run. I'm going to log in, and this time it's going to pass in the token it gets from MSAL to the HTTP request. Jump back, and there's my contact information in JSON. So that's the simple demo. This is how I get my stuff, but I'm looking, I got another 5 minutes, so I'm going to rock your world. I have the Azure portal open, and I have the AdventureWorks LT database. How many times have you seen this database? Probably 1,000,000 times. And I'm going to show it to you again. A couple things I've done here. I've opened up my firewall, so allow requests from any port. And I don't know the username and password for the admin account, and I don't want to. I'm using Azure Active Directory for Auth. I'm going to do a really simple query, 2 queries. Select all from sales lt.product. Run it. That just gets me like product IDs, names, product numbers, colors, and lots of other columns that may be interested in. I'm going to do another query. Select count 1 from sales LT product. Should return, I think it's like 300, a little less than 300. And somebody said, your query is running really slow. It's because I'm cheap. I have the slowest tier possible. I'm not paying a lot of money for a demo, right? All right, so 295. We're cooking. Let's see if we could connect to this SQL database using the MSAL library without putting any credentials in at all. So the first thing I need to do is .NET add package. I'm going to do ADO.NET first. So system.data.SQL client, I believe, is the correct name for the package. I'm going to go in here using system.data.SQL client, And since we're just connected to a SQL server, we don't need that. We don't need to use plural anymore. All right. So for those who are using Entity Framework every day, we're going to dig into your old school knowledge. So I'm going to create a connection string variable. I just need to learn how to type today, connection string. And here's the fun part. I'm going to go back to the Azure portal. And I'm going to click Show Database Connection Strings. And it shows me connection string, but no password. You know what? I don't care. I don't want a username and password. The only thing I'm going to copy is the name of the server, port, and then the initial catalog. That's it. That's all I need in my connection string. The initial catalog is called EventWorks. Prod SQL Server Sidney.database.windows.net, port 1433. That's it. My connection string has no credentials at all. Going to create a new instance of SQL connection class. I'm going to call this connection equals new. If you haven't been using .NET 5, C#9 introduces this, where I can just pass in the parameters to the constructor. I don't have to actually say new SQL connection. It's inferred from the left-hand side. I want to dispose of this after I'm done, so I'll make this a using statement. That means whenever this scope closes, which for my example would be the end of the application, it'll dispose of SQL connection. Wow, that's so much easier to read. So connection.access token. Well, we have an access token, result.access token. That was easy. I'm going to call connection.openAsync and await that. ADO, so connection create command, stored in a variable called command. I'm going a little bit fast if I want to get everything in. Command.command text equals select. I want to get the count from sales lt.product. So I need to call command.execute scalar. And I know everybody's old school ADO knowledge is coming back. Execute scalar async. I need to use it as, it's going to be a nullable int because it might be null or it might be an integer value. I need to await that call and store it in a variable called count. I want to write this out. So write line count tab. Then I'm going to print out the count variable. You know what? If it's null, let's print out 0. That's the demo right here, right? So clear my screen, .NET run, fingers crossed. It's going to open my browser. I'm going to log into Sidney. Let's see. Just make sure I did everything correctly. Oh, this is why you don't run through demos really fast. So I have permission to read the Microsoft Graph, but I don't have permission to access SQL. So how do I add that? Well, I'm going to go back to my app registrations. Remember I went to my app registration and clicked API permissions? That's what happens when you go fast, everyone. I only have permission to the Microsoft Graph. I need to add a new permission. And I can add permissions to lots of Azure services, but you know what? I want to do Azure SQL Database. There we go. And I want to give delegated permissions. Delegated permissions are if a user logs in, you can access this API on behalf of that user. Application permissions are if you have like a running background service or API that wants to have its own direct permission. Since I'm logging in, I want to use user impersonation or a delegated permission. There we go. So instead of graph.microsoft.com/user.read, my new scope is going to be database.windows.net. And then I could put in user impersonation, or I can just put in .default, which will give me what I need to make this happen. Okay, we're going to run it again. .NET run. It's going to open my browser window. Going to log in Sidney C#run.net. Oh, Sidney's application, Reactor, has requested permission to access either Azure SQL Database or Data Warehouse. Yeah, sure. Let's accept. I go back. There we go. It created my database. Lightning round. .NET add package. This is for the people who are like ADO.NET. I don't like ADO.NET. Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.SQL Server. You want to see it in Entity Framework? Let's do it in Entity Framework really fast, right? I'm going to delete everything except the connection string. I'm going to create a new class called Sales Context using DB, inheriting from DB context. I don't need System Data SQL Client anymore, so I'm going to remove that. In order to use the DB context class, I'm pretty sure I'm going to need a reference to Microsoft Entity Framework Core. Yep. going to put the string variable inside that class. So I'm a connection string variable. It's entity framework, so public class product. We need to create a POCO. Public int product ID was the name of the main field for it, and I'll make it a key, which requires a reference to system component model data annotations. If you haven't done C#9, instead of get set, I can do get init, since we only ever set this when we init this product up and we don't need to modify it later. Public string name, get init. Again, this is the equivalent of get without the set, and then allow you to initialize this property when you use the constructor. So public class product, going to use the table attribute. This is going to point at the product table, and the schema is going to be sales LT. All right, so there's our POCO. Let's see if we can, how fast we can get this going. So public DB set product, I'm going to call it products, get set here. I'm going to do on configuring, so protected, override, void, on configuring. This is just regular entity framework stuff. DB context option builder options. Now I am lazy, so I'm going to make this expression. So options.use SQL Server, pass in my connection string. I'm going really fast through this because if you're not that familiar with entity framework, this will be highly recommend you go look it up. I'm going to create a constructor from my entity framework context that takes in my token. Now, through my constructor, I'm going to call database get DB connection, and I'm going to use the add statement to make this a SQL connection. I need to add a using block to Microsoft Data SQL client, since that's where the SQL connection class comes from. Now that I have access to the SQL connection class, I can do .access token, just like we did with ADO.NET, and set it to my token. I promise at the very end, I'm going to give you a link to all this sample code. I know I'm going really fast. All right. Now that I've done all the heavy lifting of making an entity framework context, the actual code to query the database is easy. Using sales context, call it variable called context equals new. Remember earlier we talked about you don't need to specify sales context again. The constructor requires a token, so result.access token. And I'm going to do an await for each, so I don't have to worry about pagination or any of that asynchronous calls. So var product in context.products. There we go. And then write line. We'll do a real simple statement here, right? From here, we'll do square brackets, a tab. We'll print out the product name. And then within the square brackets, we'll do product.product ID. I'll do 4 zeros for spacing for formatting. And that's it. Let's give it a shot. .NET run. We won't have to give permissions again since we've already given permissions to access Azure SQL Database. Just need to log in, jump back, and there we go. I just used ADO.NET and Entity Framework to query Azure SQL Database using Azure Active Directory identity. So a lot of stuff I've done today, and a lot of links I want to share with you. Let's share this out. And everything I share with you here, I'm going to also put into the Q&A. So first off, if you want to look at the documentation for every demo I just showed you, I just put that link into the Q&A. I also put links to these 2 bottom links, aka.ms security identity -7 and aka.ms ms identity 7. Now, those 2, I highly encourage you to go check out. These 2 links will take you to Microsoft Learn hands-on tutorials that will help you learn how to work with the MSAL library and the Microsoft Identity platform. It's think of it like really quick hands-on labs. I highly recommend you check out both of these. I'm going to use my little pen to draw over there. Definitely want you to check out both of these links. Go try those hands-on labs. Let us know how it goes. And then there's my Twitter handle. If you got questions, you can send them. But just because I'm having so much fun, we're going to just jump back on. I'm going to here's some links. Thanks for coming to this Reactor session. There's the YouTube channel. There's a Reactor Twitter handle, and I don't know if Rebecca wants to jump back on about the survey, if she wanted me to share that, but we have the Reactor meetup page, the events
Hi,
calendar.
Sidney.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, how is it going? Thank you so much. There were a couple of questions. You were going pretty fast there. And again, I am strictly on the event side of things, not a techie. So there was one question in regards to redirect URLs, and then a gentleman further up on the chain, forgive me if I say your name incorrectly, Gopal, that also messaged with some questions about authorization mechanisms. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to review those questions while I quickly go through my slides. And if you wanted to, follow up after I'm done, I will
Yeah,
give
I
you the
think
floor.
I was gonna say, I think the last slide says Q&A, so that's what I'm gonna do. In that last slide, I'm gonna go ahead and answer as many of these Q&A questions as I possibly can.
Okay, great. So let me just jump on here for a moment. Let me take you. Just 1 second, please. Thank you. Well, all the fun things that go along with streaming live. So again, just as Sidney was saying, we are an international community. The Microsoft Reactor has locations around the world. As we are currently working on a virtual platform, if you're not close by to one of our locations where normally the events would be in person, we now have this wonderful opportunity to present to anyone wherever they're located, just because it's all virtual. So if you are not a part of our community yet, certainly feel free to look us up on Meetup. We have a few different locations. Select the location that works best with your time zone. We also have our own calendar through the Microsoft portal. So that link is just at the bottom there, the aka.ms Reactor Events Calendar. On that calendar, we also share some of the community events, some of our partners within our space that would have in the past presented in person. So definitely check that out. You'll see some other events listed there. You can follow us on Twitter. We're always, posting some events that are being highlighted, that are coming up. And then, of course, as I've mentioned in the chat window, we have the YouTube channel, which we post a lot of our content to. We generally record, I'd say, probably about 95% of the events we host. And those videos get put there within usually about 72 hours, but sometimes a little bit longer than that. So definitely check out those various links. We have another event coming up with security in a couple weeks, so with another MVP. So if you have the time and are interested, definitely check this one out as well. Again, it might not work with your time zone, but if it does, definitely tune in. And if it doesn't, you can always check back to that YouTube channel like a week or so later. And then finally, before we step back over to Sidney, just if you have the opportunity, we have this wonderful survey that if you have the chance to submit, give us some feedback, what you thought of this event. If you want to see other content as well that maybe we haven't issued yet, definitely feel free to submit this survey. The event code is there at the bottom, 10085. So definitely when you go to submit it, you have to enter that in. And yeah, I'll give the floor back over to Sidney now.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. We have some really great questions in the Q&A. Gopal earlier asked, hey, what if I had a web application I wanted to make available to multiple people? Can I do that? Is it possible? And yes, you can. In the demo, I showed off how to do how to do a application registration that's multi-tenant, so people can come from any tenant and not just your own. In that example, we in that example, you could definitely do that. So if they have an active Azure Active Directory and they're federating, to like a on-premise login server or some other experience they've already set up, as long as it's tied into AAD and they have a tenant ID, it's going to work out just the same way. I also saw a question about setting up behind a proxy. I've never done that myself before, but I shared a link to the Azure AD developer documentation, and it's going to have lots of those type of scenarios. I also shared a link to one of the teams I work with. We do a lot of these talks about identity and stuff. They have an email, msusdev@microsoft.com. If you got a super technical question and I'm not doing a good job answering it, send an email to us. We're actively doing a live series on much deeper, like 400 level, on this type of development, and we'll get that question to the product team for you. And I see one more really good question. Well, they're all really good, but one more that I can see here in front of me. Somebody said, "Hey, you show HTTP localhost as you redirect URI. Can you change that?" Yes, you can. If you're a web application, you can redirect to pretty much any URL you want. If you're a local application, I've redirected to localhost. I've redirected to localhost with port numbers. I've redirected to like special like URN identifiers. With mobile desktop client applications, you got a lot more flexibility than a web application has. What I did is I shared a hyperlink to the documentation specifically on how to set up a redirect URI if you have a mobile app. So again, lots of great questions came in. I'm really excited to have done this, and hope if you're interested in seeing more in the future, definitely reach out, whether it's to me or the MSFT Reactor Twitter handle. There's lots of stuff we can do around this, and also showed off a lot of cool C#9 features. And I think some speakers already came through, and some are coming up who are talking about even more C#9 features. So if you're interested in that, lots of good stuff coming up there too. But thank you everyone for your time. This was a lot of fun, even if I ran over a couple minutes.
Thank you again, Sidney. At this time, that's the conclusion of this event. Thank you again all for joining us, and see you at the next one.